The Xbox 360 is a fantastic console with a great library of games. And the great thing is that we can hack it and then play games from ISO backup files. So let's make an RGH3 modified Xbox 360. Hi and welcome to Bytes and Bits. The Xbox 360 is a great console to own even now in 2024. So this one was launched in 2005 and was on sale for about 10 years, and at that time it built up a fantastic library of some great games. Now you can pick up one of these days for around about sort of £40 to £50 or $40 to $50 on something like eBay. And if you can get hold of one, they tend to come with controllers and everything, so the full console all for that price. A little bit more if you want to buy one with a Kinect sensor, and if you can, I would highly advise that you do. The Kinect sensor is actually some great fun. Now, the best part about an Xbox 360 is that you can modify it and you can hack it, and that means that then you can start to install your own software on here that will allow you to basically, the main thing that people obviously use it for is to download games and install those so that you can get access to the full catalogue of the Xbox 360. Now, a bit of a caveat there, obviously all of this software, or the majority of the software, is copyrighted, so do make sure that you understand the copyright laws in your region before you consider downloading any of this software. But again, all of these games, or pretty much every game that was ever written or published for the Xbox 360, is out there on the internet, ready for you to download it. Now, modding the Xbox 360, it is what's known as a hard mod. We do need to strip the console down and add, in effect, 2 wires to the motherboard. So we're going to be using what's known as an RGH3 mod. Which, as I said, only requires 2 mods, but they have to be on the underside of the motherboard, so you do need to strip the entire console down. Now, that isn't actually as hard as it seems, and obviously I'll take you through every stage in that process in this video. Now, you will also need something called a NAND flasher to reprogram the firmware inside the console. Now, these generally sell for around sort of £40 to £50, but you can actually build your own using a Raspberry Pi Pico. And of course, that's what we're quite used to doing in this channel. So that's what we'll be doing. So for about £5, we'll be able to build our own NAND flasher and save ourselves a lot of money. So why not grab yourself one of these Xbox 360s, follow me through in this video, and turn it into an RGH3 modded console. So first off, as a bit of background, the RGH or reset glitch hack exploits a vulnerability in the bootloader sequence in the Xbox. So a very clever hacker called Glee discovered that if you hit the processor with a reset pulse at precisely the right time, and we are talking nanosecond timing here, the bootloader hash check, which is a bit of software that checks to make sure that you're running an official bootloader, that fails and always reports back a valid response, no matter what software you've actually got installed in there. So basically this means that our hack code is allowed to run and then take over the console. Now, previously, this reset glitch hack required a special little circuit board with a special glitch chip to be installed onto the motherboard. But even that, it was a bit hit and miss about its signal timing and didn't always actually reset the console. What we're going to be using is something called the RGH3 version. And that does away with this glitch chip and only requires us to add 2 signal wires into the motherboard. And what this basically does is it actually uses one of the motherboard's own timing signals to generate a very reliable glitch signal for the processor. And this is especially true on Xbox 360S's or the Slim version. So actually that's why I'm going to recommend buying an Xbox 360S rather than buying one of the older fat models or the newer E models. The 360S is probably the most reliable one to get working with this reset glitch hack. As well, when you buy your Xbox, don't worry about spending any extra buying one with an installed hard drive. The hard drives you buy with the Xboxes tend to max out at around about 200 gigabytes, but the hack will actually allow us to use any 2.5-inch hard drive up to 2 terabytes capacity. Now, usually you would need to buy a specialist Xbox drive, which pumps the price up. But this hack allows us to use any drive we want. So we can use a reasonably cheap 2.5-inch drive. And really, when you're considering that each game or each DVD for a game takes 5 to 6 gigabytes, we are going to need that extra space. Now in this video, I'm going to take you from your stock, newly purchased or one you've already owned, Xbox 360S, all the way through to installing our Aurora menus and then showing you how to install games from both DVDs that you own and also from these ISO files that you will have obtained from somewhere. So let's start by trying to identify exactly which version of the Xbox 360 you have, and then we'll get on with actually modifying it.
In 400 meters.
So the very first step in modding your Xbox is to identify which actual console you have, and there are quite a few versions. So they really break down into 3 main revisions. So we have the fat Xbox 360, which was the first one. And again, you'll identify that with the DVD drive, some ports beneath it, and then the USB cover being horizontal in this aspect here. That was then upgraded to the S model, the slim version. And again, you can see that we have the DVD drive. There's no ports beside that. And then we have a vertical USB slot at the front of the console. And then the final version was the E model, which again was a more sort of squarer box. Now, it is important to get the right version, and I would always advise that you go for the Slim, the Xbox 360S, for modding. The fat boxes can be modified, but not all of them are as reliably modifiable as others. The E versions, there's definitely the Winchester version of that is actually not modifiable. So if you get one of those, you are really stuck with it. So I would always, again, if you're buying one to work with modifying, I would go for an Xbox 360S. So after that then, there are of course subversions within those. So if you come down here, you can see that the fat models, again, there's various ways of identifying those. The slim model then, the motherboard identification, we're going to come across that a bit later when we actually get the motherboard out. But we can externally identify which of the 2 motherboard models you have simply by looking at the back of the machine to the sort of serial number panel and looking at the current draw on the 12-volt supply. So Trinity motherboards will draw 10.83 amps, as mine is here. Corona will draw 9.86 amps. Now, all Trinity motherboards are modded in the same way as I'm going to be going through in this tutorial. Coronas, half of them are modified the same as this Trinity board. The other part then will have a 4 gigabyte NAND chip rather than the 16 megabyte NAND chip. And they do need to be wired slightly differently on the programmer side. But again, we'll have a look at that once we get the motherboard out to identify them. So we're now going to start taking the Xbox apart. And to do that, we're going to need a couple of tools. Now, the case itself is held together by clips and some screws. But these screws then, they are security screws, so you will need a couple of different sizes of Torx screwdrivers, and these are quite small ones. I forget what actual numbers they are, but if you have a range of those, that's what you're going to need. They're not going to come apart with normal sort of Phillips heads or flat screwdrivers. The case itself then, the clips, you can get them apart with the screwdriver, but I would very much recommend getting hold of one of these X-clamp tools. Both the clips on the case themselves, this pointed end will help you get those out a lot easier.
And when it comes to actually removing the X clamp on the motherboard, it is worth having this tool for the sake of a couple of pounds. It just makes the whole process a lot easier, and it just removes any risk of actually damaging your motherboard as you try and release this sort of highly sprung metal clamp. Now, to actually create the mod, we are going to need some solid wire, and I'm using 30 AWG wire here, which is very thin. It's usually sort of termed wire wrapping wire. And do make sure you use solid core. If you are going to be soldering onto points on the PCB, so multi-core, it just makes it that much more difficult. Finally then, we are going to need a flash NAND programmer, and you can buy them, but we're going to use one using a Raspberry Pi Pico, which just brings the cost down by a hell of a lot. So make sure you've got hold of one of those, and you will need some wire then to connect that to the motherboard. Now, it's also worth at this point getting ready with some USB drives. Now, we're going to be using these to transfer files from our PC to our Xbox. Now, one of those is going to have to be formatted by the Xbox itself, and I would recommend using just a fairly small USB pen drive. So I've got a little 4GB one here, which is absolutely fine for transferring those files across. So the Xbox is going to format it in a special way, just to make sure that it is part of the Xbox itself. So do have that. We'll eventually then be transferring across some games files. Now, these tend to be sort of around about 6, 7, 8GB each, and it's worth doing those as a block. So I tend to use an SSD drive with the USB adapter plugged into that for the transfer. I would not use this for the initial bits where we're actually setting up the XEXMenu and so on. When we come to that, use a pen drive for that. So with all that put together, it's time to take our Xbox apart. So to disassemble our Xbox, we first of all need to get this black case off. So the first place to start is with the two end panels. So go to where the hard drive is, and that one just lifts out with a little clip. And then I'm using my Xbox, the X-clamp tool, and that's very handy for getting the rest of these apart. So you can just see it slips in between the grates and just lets you lever that other grill out. We now need to get this end plate off, and there are 6 holding clamps in these positions, and they are just a little bit inside the machine. So you need to just use the pointy end of the X tool just to see if you can just feel those clips and then just release them. So this is a matter of, as I say, just playing about it. Just be gentle with it. Don't force anything. But you will find as you hit a clip, it will then just release and you can start to edge up the corners. And just carry on with the other holes. Again, I'm just feeling around there. And it is just going through, and gradually you will get the feel of these. Again, this is the first time I've done this as well. So you will just get in there and you will start to feel the clips coming off and releasing. And there we have it, finally starting to come loose. And it's just this one little clip here that I'd missed. And once I release that, it just pops off. So just tidy up the sort of grill there. And then having a look at mine, this Xbox does have quite a bit of dust and grit in it. So I'm just going to, as I go along, just use my vacuum cleaner just to get rid of the majority of it. So as we're going along, so it doesn't start sort of falling about inside the whole system. So just clean it up, and that's one end done. So now we have to do the same process then on the far end. So again, we're going to get the grill off first. So with the X tool, again, going near one end, we should then be able to release that up. Just get a bit closer to the end and just release the end of that grill, and then that should just peel off. And again, we're now in the same situation where we have the same 6 clamps. I found this end, well, perhaps because I'd just done the other end, this end did come off a little bit easier. You can see here that we can just feel the clips a bit better. That's one side off, and then down the other side, and those other 3 clips just came off quite nicely. And eventually then it just pops off, and again we've now got both ends clear. So again, a little bit of a vacuum just to get rid of all the bits around here. And then we want to have a look at getting out this board. I think this is the Bluetooth board sitting here at this end of the device. So there is a security screw holding it in place, which we need to take out. Again, you'll find I think there's only 2 different types of screw. There's these sort of brass-coloured screws, and then there are some black screws. So don't worry about keeping them too separate because they end up all being the same. And this just pulls out vertically. It's on sort of like a USB connector there. So that's this end clear. Other end's clear. So now we need to have a look at getting the 2 halves of the case and the front and back of the case released. So the case is split in 2, and you can see that there are a number of these clips I'm pointing out to here, which are holding the 2 halves together. So really what we need to do is we need to start working, again, trying to release these clips so that we can actually start to pull the 2 halves apart. So there are clips at both ends on each side, and it's really just a matter of working them just to release them. So I'm working on the back of the Xbox here, and the Bluetooth end is fairly straightforward, but once you come to the other end, the 2 clips, one of them you can get to very easily, but the other is actually quite hidden, a little bit down inside the machine. So it is pretty hard to get to, but there is a trick for this one. So if we put the Xbox up facing us, if you get a little pointed tool and feel around, there is actually a hole which is specifically designed apparently to get this clip undone. So just press through there. You have to go through the actual label, but if you just, as I say, press, you will feel that there's a hole in there. Press that in, and that will actually release this hidden clip. And then it's just a matter of working with the clip which you can see in tandem with this, and you will then be able to pull it apart. What you need to do as well is you'll see that that label actually does go across the gap. So do make sure you actually cut that label so you get a nice clean cut. Otherwise, it will just rip apart. And there we can see the clip, and you can see where the tool has just pressed into that clip just to release it. So that should then let you get the other half of that case off. And now we just need to work on the front panel. Now the front panel, we do need to be a little bit careful with this. So again, there are a number of clips holding it together. We just need to work our way through on those and gradually wiggle it to try and get those off. But once you've got the clips released, do pull it off very gently because there is a ribbon cable behind this which we don't want to damage. So as you take it off, you will find behind it there is the ribbon cable which connects the power button and the eject button, or the touch buttons, to this circuit board. So we need to release this clip. So the clip is held on. It's got a little clamp. That little bar is a clamp which you have to pull over to the left on the screen. And there is then the little blue cellophane that actually holds it in place as well. So release that as well. Try and just ease that clamp out. And once you get that out, then the ribbon cable should just gently lift off. And that then keeps that nice and safe. So next, we're going to try and get the main electronics section away from the bottom of the case. So to do that, there are 5 black-headed bolts in here, and they are actually bolting down this metal case to that bottom plastic section. So we can take those off first. And once you've got those 5 out, the metal bit should then be free from the bottom case. So I found turning it back over again, we can then lift the top section off, because there is actually the top half of the metal shielding is attached to this side piece, as you can see there. So again, just lift that off, and we're now into the actual Xbox itself. So we need to get a little circuit board off the front of the Xbox, but I found that my DVD drive was a bit unstable, so I thought I'd better take that off first. So you can see the connectors for the DVD drive there, and these are just pull-off connectors. So just get yourself in there and pull those off. As you'll see in a second, that red cable, which is the SATA cable for the hard disk drive, I probably should have just released that first before I tried this. It would have been a lot easier. But again, just wiggle them about. Make sure you don't pull on the wires, pull on the actual connectors, and those then will come off. They are a bit stiff, but say just keep pulling on the connector, just give it a bit of a wiggle, and they will come out. So with the DVD drive out, as I was working on the inside, I thought I may as well just get the rest of these plastic bits out. So again, we can release the hard drive connector. It's got this sort of big black sort of bolt on the top of it. And then there's also a little brass screw on the side, and that helps hold in the whole sort of drive caddy and so on. So take that out, and then we can start to get that caddy out. Now I did find that there was a bolt on the bottom, a brass bolt on the bottom of the case, which you did need to take out before it would release this caddy. So take that out, and then it'll just come out very easily. So once we've got the last bit of that plastic out of the way, we can now look at getting the motherboard out of this shielding case. So if we turn the Xbox over, you'll see there are a number of brass screws around the edge of it. So we need to take all of those out. So this is where I noticed there was actually a circuit board on the front of the case, which I think is the Wi-Fi board, which again was attached and holding the motherboard in place. So we need to just get that out of the way. And that uses two of these black-headed screws, which use a slightly smaller security screwdriver. So just take out the two screws, and then that board actually pulls out to the front. Again, it's on another one of these sort of like USB connectors, connecting it into that motherboard. So just pull it up and it should just pop off. And once we've got that out of the way, then we can just go on to the back of the case again. And we now have the 4 black screws around that X, so that there's an X clamp underneath there. So take off those 4 screws, and then we should be ready to release the motherboard. So the motherboard should really just slide out of this shielding area. So if you just grab it at this end here, it's held in place. Basically, the sides of the case are sort of holding it in place. So if you ease those out gently and then just lift it up, and again, you can use the cooling fan here just to give you a little bit of purchase, and that then should slide out fairly easily. And that then gives us our motherboard free from that case. So next thing we need to do is we need to get the cooling fan off. So first of all, we need to unplug it from the motherboard itself. And again, this is just a little stiff connector here. So again, do be careful, don't pull the wires, but just give it a bit of a wiggle and that will release. And now we come to this thing called the X clamp, which everybody sort of talks about. And this is where our X clamp release tool is going to come in incredibly useful. So the X clamp itself is basically a piece of metal which is sprung loaded against these bolts. And to get them out, you have to put the removal tool in one end. And what it will do is going to bend a little lip out from underneath there. Now, when you put it in, you don't want to push it in all the way, just enough so it release the clip. If you push it in all the way, and then, as you can see here, I'm sort of using it to bend the clip out and over the top of this nut. If you put it in too far, as you bend the clip, as you use the tool bending it down, the teeth or the prongs will dig into your circuit board, and they can then start cutting through tracks on there, which will destroy it, of course. But once that's released, then the motherboard should just lift off, and we now have our heating, our cooling fan released then from our actual processor chip. So now we've got everything disassembled, we've got a chance to do a bit of a cleaning job on a lot of the components. So first off, we need to get the old thermal paste off the processor and off the heatsink. So do just use a bit of a paper towel just to get the main bit of it off. And then I'm using a cotton bud with some isopropanol alcohol to just clean off the rest of the residue. And once you've got that all cleaned down, then we will, of course, before we put everything back together, just apply some fresh thermal paste, just to make sure we've got a really nice thermal bond between those two. So next is really a matter of just having a look around the general state of the circuit board. Now mine actually was pretty grimy, to be honest. It looks like it's been in a damp atmosphere. There is actually some rust, and you'll see that when we look at some of the pieces in a second. There is some rust on some of the metal and so on, and the circuit board itself on the bottom does have a little bit of what looks like, not so much water damage, but just sort of moisture collection. But the actual grime then, if you have a look at this cotton bud here, as I just sort of scrape around here a bit, it's picking up a lot of dirt. And I guess, again, this is probably dust just getting stuck onto the circuit board through the damp atmosphere. So really, I'm going to have to go and just give this a bit of a clean. I probably don't have to, but I think it's just a good idea just to sort of give it a bit of a clean around, just to try and get some of this gunk off the system. So really all I'm doing is using a cotton bud and just working my way around here with some 100% isopropanol alcohol so it doesn't damage any of the components. And it really is going to take a bit of time, but obviously it's worth just getting this as good as I can before I put it back all together again. So as well as the circuit board top and bottom, I'm going to have to clean up some of the case pieces as well. So again, you can see here some of those with the metal bits. We have got a bit of corrosion taking place from the moisture. So that's all got to be sort of cleaned around. Again, I'm really just going to get the rough rust bits off rather than sort of try and clean it up completely. And the plastic bits themselves, again, it's general grime. We have got some sort of alien being obviously hatched in this area. And that's all got to be cleaned out as well. But that's really just a matter of with these plastic bits. Again, do check there aren't any electronics on them, but that can just really be washed in some soapy water just to get those all cleaned down and get all the grime. So that when we put it back together, the actual case looks pretty nice. So now we've got our Xbox all stripped down and ready for modding, we need to get hold of some of our modding tools. And the first thing we need is a NAND flasher. So this is going to let us reprogram the NAND memory chips inside the Xbox to install our hacked software. So you can buy retail versions of these and they come in at around about £40, but obviously they are dedicated to this function. What we're going to do, again, fitting in nicely with my particular channel, we're going to use a Raspberry Pi Pico, the same ones that we'll be using in our normal project work, and we're going to program that to become our NAND flasher. So the Pi Pico itself is a microcontroller board, and you can pick them up for around about sort of £4 or £5. Now there are two versions, the Pico itself and the Pico W, which is slightly more expensive, but just the basic standard one will do fine for this project. And that's really all we need. All we're going to do is solder some wires onto some of the connectors on here, and we're good to go. So if you head across to this GitHub repository, a very clever person who goes by Balika011 has actually written some code which will actually program the NAND chips. So it looks like the NAND chips are driven over an SPI channel. So that will simply just allow us to connect that up to our Pi Pico, and it will then do the conversions from our PC, because we're going to run some software on our PC, and that will then allow us to talk and program these NAND flash chips. And you can see down here they have a little pinout diagram for how we're going to connect that up. So all we need to do on here, so at the GitHub repository, we're going to go to the latest releases. So we're going to pick up, at time of publishing of this video, it was version 3. So we're just simply going to download, and we need the UF2 file. That's the one which will actually program our Pico to turn it into this NAND flasher. So just download that, and then we're going to copy that across into our Pico. So to flash the software onto the Pico, we have to hold down the boot select button and then connect it to our PC. So that will provide power and then boot it up, and that will then act as a little disk drive that we can then copy files to. So on your computer, once you've done that, you should see the Raspberry Pi pop up as a little drive. So all we need to do here is to take this UF2 file and just copy it into the root of that new disk drive, and that then will flash that code onto the Raspberry Pi Pico, and we now have our PicoFlasher all ready to go. So to get this connected to the Xbox, we're going to need to connect 7 wires to the Pi Pico. Now we can either solder these wires directly onto the I/O pins, or as I'm doing here, I've soldered some header pins onto my Pico so that it fits onto some breadboard. And then I can just use some jumper wires to connect from my breadboard. And then once I've got that in place, the other end of that then I'll solder onto my Xbox motherboard. And that just means that once I finish this project, I can actually just take everything apart and return the Pi Pico into my project kit. So it's now time to actually modify our motherboard and connect it all together. So I do advise you have a look at this article on the Xbox 360 hub. So this is a guide which takes you through each of the individual models and motherboard variations that you're going to come across with your Xbox 360 modification. As I said, I'm advising that you try and use a Slim or the 360S model, and I'm specifically going to be going through the Trinity model in this tutorial. And again, that's the easy one because they're all the same. If you do have a Corona motherboard, then you will need to have a look through here because they do need to be handled slightly differently depending on which version you have. Now, obviously, we've already gone through taking apart the Xbox, but the bits we'll need for this modification then, you are going to need some very fine wire. You can get away with thicker wire to work with these. I would definitely avoid using multi-core wire. So try and get some hold of some single core wire. And if you can, I'm going to be using 30 AWG wire, which is this wire wrapping wire down here. And that just is a really nice size because some of the pads that we're going to be wiring to are very small. So a nice fine wire will just make it much more easy to get a good connection with that. Now, depending on what motherboard you're using, as I said, the Trinity's all fine, but the Corona then, there are a couple which will throw a little bit of a curveball at you. So if you look on your circuit board, just near to the processor, you will find that there should be some tracks sitting here for the version 1 and 2 Corona motherboards. Those were left out on the later revisions of the board, but we do need those to be able to make a modification. So you are going to need something called a post-fix adapter, and that is one of these little, in effect, circuit boards. So this, in effect, fits around the processor chip and will then solder to various points on the circuit board just to reinstall the points which we need to connect to. So you'll need one of those. Also then, we are going to need just one resistor actually for either Trinity or Corona. So for a Trinity board, we're going to need a single resistor around about 10K or just below. You can see here that the sort of variation, it is not so specific as to what you need. Most people tend to use around about 10K. I'm going to use a 9K simply because that's what I had available. I didn't have any 10Ks left. The Corona then, we're going to need a 1K resistor, and that's simply going to be, we're going to put that in the middle of a wire which connects 2 points together. Obviously, we've already had a look at our Pi Pico, and down here then, we do need to, when we connect up our Pi Pico, be aware of which board we have. So as I said, for our Trinity board, we're going to connect up our Pi Pico on the SPI NAND programming side to pins over here. And again, I'll take you through that in more detail when we get to it. For the Corona then, there are a number of variations on boards here. So first off, some of the boards will have some missing resistors, which you will either have to add little bridges in there or add little resistors in. The NAND programming, it again depends on which NAND chips you have. So there are two versions on here. There's the 16 megabit NAND chips and the 4 gigabyte NAND chips. So the PicoFlasher needs to be connected in different ways depending on which one you have. But again, everything is explained in this tutorial. So please do look through that if you have got a Corona board and it is not going to be wired up the same as the one I'm going to be going through with the Trinity board here. Okay, so make sure you have a look at that. And let's go through now with the Trinity board, and I'll show you the process. Once you've connected up the NAND program and so on, the process is pretty much identical, whichever one you do. It's just making sure that you get the connections correct to begin with, which of course is a very, very important part. So our motherboard modifications are going to take place on the bottom of the motherboard. And basically, we're going to connect two pairs of points together. And one of those then will have this resistor in the middle of the wire that connects the 2 points together. So the various points we're going to connect then, we have a PLL or a PLL bypass point, and that's going to be connected using this 10K resistor or 9K resistor in my case to this SMC PLL point. And then we're going to connect the post pad to the SMC post pad just with a pure wire. So if we then have a look in more detail at the circuit board, we can actually identify where these points are. So in this view of the other underside of the motherboard, we can see the general areas you need to look in for each of these 4 connection points. So if we go through them individually then, so the first one that we had was the PLL bypass or PLL, which is labelled on the Corona diagrams, and that is in this area here. So the actual pad we need to solder to is actually just a via, and it is underneath the solder mask, and you can see it's just between the R and the 3 of the silkscreen text for this C5R35. And this is by far going to be the hardest one for us to make. But again, we'll go through that in fine detail when we get to it. So PLL bypass needs to be connected through that 10K resistor to SMC PLL. So you'll find that labelled down near the actual Microsoft logo as FT2V1, and that is an actual soldered pin, so that will be exposed and we can just solder directly onto that. The second pair of connections then are from the post pin, and this is on a set of diagonal solder pins which are very close to one of the holes for the X clamp. So again, as you can see on the diagram above, do make sure you identify exactly which pin we need to connect to. And this then is connected just by a plain wire to this SMC post pin, which is another pre-soldered point. And you can see it's just above the first 2 in this silkscreen text R3R22. So that is our final point. So do make sure you examine your motherboard before you start soldering, just to make sure you can identify exactly which pins you need to go to. And again, if you're using one of the Corona boards, then do please refer back to that guide. It does have very similar diagrams, which will again identify exactly where your pins are going to be soldered to. So the first thing then is to get our wiring ready. And again, I'm using this very thin wire wrapping wire, which does have a PVC insulation on it, which does need to be stripped back. But again, it's a nice solid wire, and I'm going to solder that onto my resistor. So this is going to be the one wire where we have to put this resistor in the middle of the connection. So I'm just going to trim the ends of that, just so we've got a nice sort of connection point to solder onto. And then I'm going to just use my helping hands here just to hold that for me while I solder wires then to both ends of it. And when we're making up these wires, do make sure you give yourself enough spare cable. So I'm giving a good sort of 15 centimeters either side, just so it gives me options then on where I route my wires between these 2 points. Now, if you're not too familiar or confident with your soldering, then do please have a look at my beginner tutorial on how to solder, which covers all of the different techniques that we're going to be using in this modification, including joining wires to components and wires to wires. And again, I'll put a link to that in the description down below, so do have a go through that if you're not sure what to do. So once we've got that resistor in place, we obviously need to make sure that those connection points don't touch anything on our motherboard. So I'm just going to use a little bit of heat shrink sleeving here, or you could use some insulating tape just to wrap it to make sure that those pins don't touch anything on our circuit board. So to make our connections then, I'm going to start with this PLL bypass, which is the most difficult one to begin with. As I said, this is underneath the solder mask. So I'm just using the back of a craft knife here, just to very gently scrape away at that solder mask. And again, just making sure I get any bits of dust out of the way. And I'm just going to take it down just in various stages. And what I'm looking for here is a nice clear copper ring as I expose the via pad underneath. Now, there are traces everywhere around here, so do be very, very careful that you don't damage any of the tracks in the circuit board. So there are tracks either side of the actual via. So just take it down very gently. Just keep looking at it until you get down to a nice, clear, bright copper ring with none of the solder mask on it anymore. Because any of the solder mask that's still over the side of the copper will stop the solder that we're going to put on there in a second from sticking to it. So once we've got that nicely exposed, we need to prime it with some flux, and then we're going to try and get some solder onto that pad so that we are ready then to solder a wire to it. So I'm just bringing in my solder here, and I'm just going to make sure that I get a bit of solder on my iron, and then just put that down on top of the pad, and we should then get some solder sticking to that via. So it's now time to add our wire. So again, just going to put a little bit more flux on there. I've already tinned the end of my wire that I'm going to join onto here. So I'm just bringing that in with a bit of solder, and we're just going to solder that in place. And again, by just tapping it on top and just pressing it down onto that solder blob that we put in before, we get a nice secure join to our PLL bypass point. And one thing I would ask you to be careful with as you are making these joins throughout all 4 connections, you can see on this one that there is a little surface mount resistor just to one side of it. So do make sure that you don't run your wire across that, because as you solder the end of the wire, of course, the insulation can recede back a bit, and you really don't want this wire joining with one end of that resistor. So just route your wires away from any of the components. So the other end of this wire then goes down to our SMC PLL. Again, I'm just routing the wire down and stripping off the end of it. Now this one is an already soldered post, so we can just refresh that solder joint with a little bit of flux and then a little bit of fresh solder. And then we should be able to then just tin the end of our stripped wire, and then that should just solder straight onto that as before. So just getting it in line, then just a little bit more flux on there, and then bringing our iron in, and that should then give us a nice neat join onto that solder pad. So that's our first wire installed. So next we're at our SMC post connection, and again, very similar idea. Again, we're using flux and fresh solder just to refresh that solder pad. And then we're bringing in our wire, and again, just tinning that and then resoldering it onto that connection point. And again, very final then one for our post pin. So again, making sure we get to the right one up here, and again, just refreshing it with flux and solder, and then soldering on the actual flying lead itself. And that then should be all of our connections made. So we then just need to make sure we go around each of these solder joints and just clean up any extra flux residue that's there. And then we just need to just secure the wires in place with some heat-resistant tape, just to make sure they don't get caught on anything or get in the way of any other components. And that then is our RGH3 mod actually in situ. So now we need to connect up our PicoFlasher. So the circuit diagram with the connections which we need are shown on the screen at the moment. And again, don't forget, if you're using the Corona motherboard, you do need to make sure you check back to that other guide, which will have the circuit diagrams that you need for your board. So really all we do then is we have these 7 wires coming off from our Pi Pico, and they just need to go to the relevant pads on the front of, or the top surface of our motherboard. So with our NAND flasher in place, we're now able to program the NAND memory chips on the Xbox 360, which will allow us then to put in our own firmware package, which will complete our hack. So to program our motherboard, we are going to need to power it up. So we're going to have to start replacing some of the parts, or just enough to get it up and running. So first off then, our processor needs its heatsink back on. We really don't want to run the system without having some heat dissipation going on here. So I'm going to reseat the heatsink with some thermal paste. And again, different people do this in different ways. I like to give it a bit of a spread around on top of my processor board. Some people like to just put a blob in the center and let it go through. But again, make sure you do it whatever way you do it to get a good thermal connection. So once we've got that thermal paste on, then it's a matter of making sure we mount the heatsink the right way around. So make sure that the fan cable is coming off towards the fan connector, and then just thread it through the holes. We then need to turn it over so that we can now get access to where the X clamp is going to go back on again. And then the X clamp itself then, so we're going to fit that on, and do make sure that you get it the same way around that it came off. So there is that little sort of longer slot which points down towards the bottom of the board here. We then just put it back onto its 4 posts, and then use our removal tool pretty much in exactly the same way as we did before, but this time instead of pulling up we're going to press down, and then just gently reclip back all of those 4 posts. Again, make sure you don't put that the clamp tool through too far so that it digs into the circuit board. And again, this is where I say if you have bought the clamp, the clamp tool, it does make this whole process so much easier. So we now want to make sure that the bottom surface of the motherboard is safe from any sort of short connections or so on. So we'll put it back into its aluminium housing. And again, just make sure that the X clamp goes over the top of that X shape indentation in the base plate. And then just, as I say, one side fits in, just lever out the edges of the casing, and that should just slot back in again. We then just need to flip the case over, and I'm going to put back in the 4 black screws which connect onto the Xbox, the X clamp, just to make sure that the motherboard is held securely in position. Now once we've got those 4 screws in place, we just need to put back in the Wi-Fi board, which plugs in on the front there. We just push that into place, and then just use its black screws just to just secure it into there. And now we should have everything we need to actually get this motherboard powered back up again in a safe fashion. So finally then, we just need to bring in our PicoFlasher and just connect up these 7 wires. Again, making sure that we put them, again, obviously to the right pins on the Pi Pico. And we're now ready to start flashing our NAND. So we now need to plug the Xbox back into its power brick, but we mustn't power up the power brick yet. So make sure the socket is turned off or just not plugged in. We are going to be applying power in a little bit. We are not going to try and turn the Xbox on. This is very important. You can damage things if we do this too early. So to program our NAND, we need to use the JRunner with Extras package. So you can get that from Octal450's GitHub repository. And again, I'll put the links to this in the description down below. But when you get to the GitHub page, just go to the releases page again. And then we're just simply going to download the JRunner with Extras zip file. And then all we need to do is to extract that. So we've now got the software we need to communicate with our NAND programmer with our Pi Pico. And that's just this JRunner.exe here. So if we start that up, you might get the message that you need to install the Visual Studio C++ extension. So let's just click OK to install that as well. And we should now find that JRunner will run for us. So let's get this connected up then to our Pico and get our Xbox up and running and see if we can program our NAND. So use your micro USB cable to connect from the Pico to your computer. So ideally what should happen when we plug our Pico in is that we should get a little PicoFlasher icon appearing inside JRunner, and that means that JRunner is now able to talk to PicoFlasher and then create work with our NAND chips. Now I did find that this did not actually work for me. So if I unplug my Pi Pico here, you can see we lose connection. What should happen is if I plug it back in again, it should now connect to that. But obviously it's not doing that. And the only way I could get it to actually connect to it was to actually reflash the Pico. So I'm disconnecting my Pico again. I'm holding down the boot select button to put it into drive mode. So you can see that we now have our Pico drive coming up here. If I now reflash it by dragging across that UF2 file we downloaded earlier, at this point it now is able to reconnect back up and we have the PicoFlasher. So that's the only way I could actually get it to connect to JRunner. So each time I unplug it, I do have to reflash it, and then we will get it connected up again. So I'm not quite sure if that is just a problem with this particular version of PicoFlasher, but that's all I could do to get it to work. So now it's time to start programming these NAND chips. Now the process here should be that we connect up our PicoFlasher to JRunner. We're going to then apply power to the console. So we're going to plug the console into the power brick. We're going to turn the power brick on, but you don't turn the console on. Okay, so that's quite important. And at that point, we should be able to get everything to connect up. So again, let's get that started on here. So first of all, I'm going to flash my Pico. So I'm going to drag my RP2 file onto that, and that should then come up inside Pico our JRunner. So our console is plugged into the power brick, and the power brick is turned on, but the console is not turned on. So we're going to ask JRunner to read our NANDs twice, and then we're going to click on the Read NAND button. So if everything is set up correctly, our PicoFlasher should start to read the current contents of the Xbox NAND chips. And that's actually, as you can see there, it's going to read them, and it's going to save a copy of that, which is very important, into an output folder. So let that run through for the first read. And when it gets to the end of this read, it should be able to identify our console. So there we go, and you can see it up in the corner here. It has now identified my console as a Trinity motherboard with a 16 megabyte flash, and you can see all the various details there in that section. So it's going to do a second read just to make sure that we have two copies of that for safety. And again, this will help us rebuild our machine if anything does go wrong or we brick it or something like that. So you just let that second read process run through as well. And if everything's all okay, the two NAND reads should come up the same, and that means that we are all set to go. So the next step is to create our Xel Loader software. So this is, well, it stands for Xenon Linux Loader, and basically it's a piece of code that allows us to catch the CPU as it boots up and then load an alternative operating system in. So this is where the RGH or the reset glitch hack really comes into play, where this glitch will allow us to trigger this Xel loader and actually load our own version then from our NAND chips. So we need to make sure that we set that up correctly to produce the correct version. So up in the top corner here, we need to make sure that we are using glitch 2. And then we need to enable our RGH3 hack. And we should see a little megahertz or little frequency symbol come across beside that. And it should then automatically select the frequency that we need to use. So once we have that in place, we then just click on the button to create Xel and let that run through. So once that image has been created, we then need to write that out to our NAND. So there's a button next to the create one, which is the write Xel. So we click that, and that will then write that code out to our NAND. And that is our glitch hack in place. Now in this next step, we're going to need to power on the Xbox. But to begin with, I would first of all unplug the power brick from the back of it, just to make sure there's nothing or no power around on our motherboard. We're now going to need to disconnect our Pico. We don't need to unsolder or anything like that. We just need to unplug it from the USB cable and just leave it off to one side. We now need to reattach the front panel with the power button on it. I remember there's a little ribbon cable which attaches that onto the front circuit board. So you just need to make sure that ribbon cable is plugged in, because we just need to have access to the power button to be able to turn this on. So once you've got all that in place, we then need, of course, to connect up through HDMI to a monitor. And then we're simply going to press the power button and let the Xbox boot up. So if you get to this blue Xel Reloaded screen, then great, everything is working just exactly as it should. So let it run through its checking process. This isn't going to fully boot the system because we haven't yet finished, but we are waiting now for some important numbers to be reported back from the device. So obviously I've blanked my numbers out here, but the one we're after is this CPU key. So this is a unique identifier to our console. And JRunner needs that to be able to decrypt our NAND software so that it is able to then create an XE build, which will replace that and give us our modded box. So back into JRunner, and all we need to do is to type that CPU key into the box provided. Now, if everything goes correctly and your key is accepted, it should go through and then complete its NAND initialization. And we're now ready to do the final step of actually flashing our NAND with the new software. So we now need to power down our console. We're going to leave the power brick attached and turned on, but obviously the console powered down. So we now need to make sure that our PicoFlasher is all set up and connected to our JRunner. So again, we should have that little logo appearing inside JRunner to say that it's all set up. And then we need to check our settings. So we're running Glitch 2 and we're running RGH3. And then we can go and create our XE build. So click on that button and it should now start running through building up our software. So once that's completed, we should then be able to write that out to our NAND by clicking on the right NAND button. And that will then program our NAND with our updated software. And at that point, we now have a fully modded Xbox 360. So you can now unplug the power lead from the back of the Xbox because we need that powered down, and then just desolder the wires for PicoFlasher. We finished flashing now. So before we start putting the Xbox back together, let's do a boot test. So plug it all back in and power on. And you should find you get back to the normal Xbox boot up screen. And this is absolutely normal and exactly what we want. And it proves to us that we haven't damaged anything in our modding process. Now, if we do want to prove that the mod is in place, we need to power down the console and then turn it back on, but not with the power button, but by pressing the eject button. And if you do that, we should boot into our Zell Reloader again. And that shows us that our hack is all in place. So now we've got everything set up. There's just one last job to do with JRunner before we can go off and set up our software. So if you go back into your JRunner folder, so the place where you extracted JRunner, so I've got my executable file there, you should find it's now created a folder with the serial number of your console. And if we open up that folder, inside there, you'll see a number of files. And if you've been watching what was happening as JRunner was working, some of these names will sort of mean something to you. So we have NAND dump 1 and 2. These are backup copies of your retail NAND, so the NAND for your unmodified Xbox. And again, if you ever need to get back to that original Xbox, then these are the NAND dumps that we can reuse. The one down the bottom here, the UPD flash, that is the new NAND code that we've just flashed in. So that is with the modified version. And again, you have in here your CPU key, you have your key vault, that's the security key for that. So these are very important files which you need to keep safe because they will, if there's something goes wrong with your console as we go off and install software and do other bits and pieces of work with it, if anything happens which would corrupt your NAND code and brick your console, then these files will let you get back to either the modified version as it stands now, or back then to your full retail version if you want to just remove it. And of course, if you do want to get back to retail version, you will have to desolder the modification wires that we put in. So it saved them here for you. So do make sure that you take a copy of these and keep them somewhere safe and don't lose them. So obviously we also have to put the console back together again, and that's just simply a reverse of the disassembly process. Now do make sure you
follow that process and put all the screws back in. I actually had to rebuild mine twice. I got to the end and had one little screw left over and had to take it all apart again to find out where that screw actually existed. But it's not such a big process, so go through that, and eventually then you will have now your fully complete, rebuilt, modded Xbox 360. Now, one of the great things about a modded Xbox is that it can actually take any hard drive that you want. We don't have to have specialist Xbox hard drives. So I've just got a normal 500GB laptop drive here, and I've bought myself one of these drive enclosures which is specifically for the Xbox 360X. So I'm just simply putting the drive inside there. Do make sure you get the drive the right way round, and then that will just simply slot into the hard drive slot in our Xbox. So if we now boot up our Xbox, when we get to the menu, go across to our settings, and in settings go to System, and then down to Storage. Inside there we should find we have a hard drive being recognised. We go down to select that, but we select it with the Y button. We should then be able to go and format that, say yes to that. We're now going to need the console serial number, and you'll find that either behind the flap on the USB port on the front of the console, or if you go to System Settings and scroll down the bottom to Console Info. So just type that in here, and once you've done that, it should then format the hard drive for you, and then lo and behold, we now have a fully installed 460GB hard drive in our Xbox 360. Now, with one of these modded Xboxes, you can fit anything up to a 2TB hard drive, and I would advise you think about increasing the size of your hard drive. All of the games are going to come in at about 5 or 6GB each, and that's per DVD. So very quickly, if you have a 200GB hard drive, you're going to cram it full of software. So do have a think about upgrading that. But all that's left now then is we need to set up some menu systems and some software to get our Xbox playing any game that we want. So to install our software onto the Xbox, we're going to need a USB drive, and we're really going to use this to transfer files from our PC across to the hard drive on our Xbox. Now, this USB drive needs to be specially formatted by the Xbox itself, and of course that's going to delete all the content on it, so do make sure you use a USB drive that you don't mind wiping. So I've plugged it into the back of my Xbox, and I'm going to go across to my settings, and then to my system, and then to storage. And we should find that we have our USB drive in there, so I've got that down at the bottom here. So I'm going to select that with my Y button for device options, and then I'm going to go and format that. So that should be okay. And once that's formatted, we now need to take that back to our PC and add some of the files to it. So to get our Xbox set up, we're going to need 3 bits of software. So XEXMenu and DashLaunch are really sort of, we're going to use those as utilities to get everything set up. And then we're going to use a package called Aurora, which is a replacement for the menu system on our Xbox. And that will give us a nice interface to play all of our games library. So I'll put all these links obviously in the description, and don't forget as well, this project will have a page on my bytesandbits.co.uk website, where again I'll have more information and these same download links. So the links I'm giving you here, the first link in each section then is a link to the actual software we need to download, and the second link then is to a page inside this consolemods.org website, which just tells you a little bit about what that piece of software does. So if I jump across then into my web browser here, so I've got these pages already set up. So first of all, we'll download the XEXMenu. So if you go to the page and then scroll down a bit, you'll find that there are 2 links here to download. So we want the live XEX option. So just simply download that. We then go across to the DashLaunch link. And again, we're just going to simply download that. And then we're going to go across to the Aurora link. Now, if you scroll down, you'll come down to a link to the latest release. And then we're just going to download that as well. If we now find those downloads in our file manager, we should have them just sitting there. Now I've also then plugged in my USB drive from the Xbox, and we have that sitting over on this tab here. And now you should find that you have two entries in that. One will be a folder marked content, and then this name.txt. Now the content is actually a hidden file. If you don't see that, you need to make sure that you turn on hidden files in your in your Explorer. So if I turn that off, you'll see that that one disappears. So go into your View, Show, and make sure you've got hidden files showing. Now to get things ready for our file transfer, we do need to go into our content folder and then make a new folder. And the folder name needs to be 16 zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 16 zeros, and just OK that. And again, that's a special file name that the Xbox will be looking for. So let's go back across to our downloaded files. So we need to extract these archives into their own separate folders. So if I go through here, I can go and use my little one, and that should extract them all into separate folders. Okay, so we now have our XEXMenu folder and our other two there sitting there as well. So we're going to copy some of these directly across onto our USB drive. So the Aurora file, that's going to go into the root folder of our USB drive. So into the root folder here. And I'm actually going to rename that as, this is actually going to show up on our Xbox menu. So if I just call it Aurora by itself, that then will just make it more obvious what that is. So I'm just going to copy that across into my root folder of my USB drive. So once that one's copied over, we're going to work with our DashLaunch then. So I'm going to open up the DashLaunch folder, and it's the installer and the Zell launch that we want. Now the installer, again, that is actually the Dash icon app. So I'm just going to rename that DashLaunch. Okay, so we've got those. And then those two folders then need to be copied across into the root folder of our USB drive. So back again out here and come up. Last one then is our XEXMenu. So if I go in there, you'll find inside here, you will get to two more archive files, and we need to extract those out again. So we should then have an XEXMenu with an XEX at the end of it. And that one we just need to copy across into our USB drive, into the root of our USB drive. And then the last one we need is going to go into our content folder and into the 16 zeros folder. So I come back over here, and that is our live version. But if we open that up, we want to copy that folder there. So the code 999 folder, that's going to be copied into that 16 zero folder on our USB drive. Okay, so on our USB drive then, inside our 16 zero folder, that code 999, then come back out of there. All the rest of it then should be in the root of our USB drive. So that's the USB drive ready. So let's plug that into our Xbox and start installing the files in there. Okay, so we're back on our Xbox and we've got our USB drive plugged in. So if we go up to our menus and go across, the first thing we need to make sure is that we are actually signed in, because some of the functions that we're going to be doing need us to be signed in. Now at the moment I haven't got any account created, so I'm just going to come down and sign in. I'm then going to create a profile. And I'm going to create it on my hard drive. And we're just going to call this Bob. So I'm just going to go through this quickly, just setting everything as default. And if I now come across, you can see that I'm now signed in with this account. So we now need to start moving these apps from our USB drive across to our Xbox. So in our settings, if we go into System, and then down to Network, or Storage, sorry, you should find our USB drive sitting there.
And on the USB drive, there's actually one file in here in our demos. So if we go into demos, this is XEXMenu, and we want to then copy that across to our hard drive. So the good thing about XEXMenu is that lets us into the system so we can start moving files around. And XEXMenu then has this installer app on it. So if we come back out then to our main menus and go across to our games, if we then go across into My Games, we should see that we now have XEXMenu sitting in there. So if I launch that, that will then install our XEXMenu. So in XEXMenu, we're going to be using our controller to navigate and perform commands. And there's a little help item. So if you press the back button on your controller, it will bring you up this sort of help screen. And basically the way this works is we have a number of different menus, and you can change which menu you're looking at, and that will be showing up in the top right corner by using your left and right bumper. Once you're into a menu, you can then use your D-pad to change the selection in that. And it'll make more sense once we actually do it. It is a little bit confusing, I must admit, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. So we're going to use the A button to select things and the B button to sort of back out of things. So let's press our help button, or sorry, our back button again to get rid of the help. So at the moment we're in the Games Discovery menu. So I want to use my right bumper to move across to my storage devices. So you can see at the moment I'm now looking at my USB drive, and there we can see the files or the folders which we want to copy across. So at the moment Aurora is highlighted. I can use my D-pad to move up and down on those. I can then select Aurora, but I'm going to use the Y button to bring up a menu for that, so various options on what to do for it. So we want to copy Aurora, copy the folder, and we want to copy it across onto our hard drive. So we're in the drives menu, so we want to use the right on our D-pad to change our drive. So you can see we're now on hard drive 1. Now we can't just copy it into the root folder, or a better way of doing that of course is to keep our menu or our folder system organized. So we're going to create a folder in here. So I'm going to press Y to bring up my commands, and then I'm going to come down to create and select that with the A button. And I'm now going to create an apps folder. So if I come in here, I can create, well first of all I've got to delete those. So we'll use the X button to delete those things. So apps. And then start to set done. Okay, so we now have an apps folder in there. So let's go into our apps folder, press Y to bring up our commands again, and I'm going to paste my Aurora folder in here. Okay, so that's our first folder copied across. So if we now come back out, again, I need to go back to my USB drive, so I need to go to the left. And we now need to copy our DashLaunch, our our Zell Launch, and our XEXMenu in exactly the same way into that apps folder. Okay, so in our hard drive now, we have all of those apps stored in our apps folder. With all the files copied, we no longer need the USB drive plugged in, so we can just take that out. And next we need to set up DashLaunch. So DashLaunch is an application that lets us make various setting changes on the Xbox. And that's what we're finding out at the moment. These applications, so XEXMenu and DashLaunch, we're really using those as helper applications to get Aurora, which is going to be our main dashboard setup. So we're going to run DashLaunch first. So that's in our apps folder on our hard drive, and then in DashLaunch. And the XEX files are the executables on the Xbox, so we can just run that default one, and that should drop us into DashLaunch. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up some paths. So we're going to use the A button to select paths, and then we're going to go down to default. So this setting is the application that runs when the console starts up or boots. So we want to get it to boot into Aurora when we first start the console. So we're going to use A to select that. And now we need to tell it which application to run. So again, Aurora is on our hard drive. It's in our apps folder, in the Aurora folder. And there we have the XEX executable file, and we select that. So that's now set Aurora to be the default menu system when we turn on the computer, on the Xbox. Okay, so we're going to go up to the top here. In this application, B quits the whole application, so don't use the B key. We just go back up to paths here. The next thing we need to change is in our networks. So go down to networks, and these are various network settings. And you can see there's a number of options which are either turned on or off. And the important thing here is we need to make sure that Live Block and Live Strong are both enabled. And what these do is they block the console from connecting with the Microsoft Live servers. And that really means then if your hacked Xbox was to connect to those servers, Microsoft would then block your account. And of course, we don't want that happening. So do make sure that you turn those or enable these two options to block traffic to the Microsoft Live servers. Now, there are ways around this using stealth servers, but obviously we're not going to go into that in this video. So as far as DashLaunch is concerned, that gives us enough to get us moving out of here. So we want to make sure that we save our setting changes. So you can see there's a little menu popped up, and again, you can bring that little menu up with the back button. And the right bumper then allows us to save our INI file. So let's press our right bumper. And then we're going to select where we want to save that. So down onto our hard drive. And again, if I look at the menu buttons here, you can see that to save our launch INI file, we press the X button. And you should see then down in the bottom left corner, it now says that it has saved those settings. So if we now quit out of DashLaunch, that should reset our console and bring us into Aurora. So B to quit. And there we are in Aurora. And of course, we don't have anything loaded into this yet. So that's going to be the next step. So Aurora is going to be our main menu for finding our applications and our games. So we need to do a little bit of setting up in here to get that working properly. So if you look down the bottom of the screen, you'll see there is a little menu which tells you which buttons on your controller to do various actions. So first off, we want to make sure that we have somewhere to save our game files to keep them nicely in one place. So we're going to use our system menu here. So press the back button, and that brings up our system menu. We can then go to our file manager with the A button. At the moment, we're sitting looking at the various storage areas on our Xbox. So we want to save our games onto our hard drive. And inside there, we're going to make a folder called Games. So I'm going to use my D-pad to go to the left. And you can see I'm now in the side menu. And that top button allows us to create a folder. So if I select that with A, and we're now going to make a Games folder where we're going to be saving all of our game files. Okay, so you can see we now have a Games file sitting in there. So let's come out of here. So I'm going to come back, use the B key to go back, and that should take us then back up to our main menu. So we now need to tell Aurora where we're going to put all of our games and our applications. So we do that in the settings menu, which is the start button. And then you should see that we have the highlight on the left sidebar menu. If you haven't got it there, just use the D-pad to move across to there. But we want to come down then to where it says content. And now we're going to use the D-pad to move across. So for title updates, we want it to auto scan for new applications and games that we add. We then need to come down, and we then want to tell it, by managing paths, where we are storing our games. So I'm going to add a new path. So we make sure that the change button is highlighted. Again, use your D-pad if it's not highlighted. I'm going to select that. And we're then going to tell it where we want to save our game. So we're going to come into our hard drive, and then we're going to highlight the apps folder. And then we're going to select that by using the Y button. So you can see now that our path is to the Xbox 360 hard drive apps. The next thing to do is come down to where it says depth. Now what this is for, is going to tell the Xbox how deep into this folder system it should scan for new applications. So if you remember, whenever we were launching our apps, Aurora and the launcher, we had to go into so we went to apps, then we went into the Aurora folder, and that's where we then found the executable file. So if you think about it, we have apps, we have to go in one level to get to Aurora, and then one more level to get down to the executable file. So we need a depth of 2 for here. You can set it to more than that, but obviously then it's going to spend some extra time delving down into deeper folders where it doesn't need to. So let's come down and we can just go across and click Save on that. And you can see we now have a path installed for our apps folder at a scan depth of 2. So again, we're going to add a new path then. This is going to be our games folder. So again, on the hard drive and into games and select that. The path for this, I'm going to set that to 4. And again, depending on how you manage your game folders, you may need to increase that slightly, but 4 should work okay. And then we're going to come down and we're going to save that. So we now have 2 paths set up where Aurora is going to scan for new apps and new games. So let's come out of this by pressing the B button. And you should then find that it's obviously found some stuff, but as yet it's not loading any cover art. And again, that's because it needs to go on the internet to find that. And of course, we blocked the internet a while back just to make sure that we didn't hit the live servers and get our account banned. But of course, in our DashLaunch, we did enable our live blocking settings. So we now are able to get our internet set up. So the easiest way to do that is to go into the main Xbox menu. So if I press the Xbox button on my controller, we should then be able to go across into our settings, and we want to go to our system settings and select that. And again, it says we're going to lose our settings inside Aurora. But obviously we've already saved those paths and everything, so don't worry about this. We can just go straight across into our normal menu. So in our Xbox menu, we're going to come down to Network Settings. And I'm going to set up my Wi-Fi connection. So I'm just going to go into my Wi-Fi here. And then I'm just going to follow through, entering my password and so on. So once I've put the password in, that should now run up a network test. Okay, so it is going to bring up a test failed message, but if we cancel that, so we can see that it is connected to the network, but it hasn't been able to get to the internet or Xbox Live. Now that is actually our DashLaunch blocking it from connecting to the Xbox Live server. So as long as your actual router is working, you can see that we are connected to the router. So we should now have internet access, even though the Xbox Live connection, of course, has failed. And again, that is what should be happening. We do not want this hacked console connecting to Xbox Live. So we want to come back into our Aurora setup now. So again, I can press my Xbox button. And again, we have an option there to go to Aurora Home, so just select that. And again, yes, we want to do that. So we're now in Aurora, and we want to go into our settings, and we want to go to our assets, and we want to go to download assets. And we should find then that starts to, if I come back again, we should find that then starts to populate those cover arts, and we now see our applications sitting on our Aurora desktop. And there we go. So you can see we can now move across, and we now have a number of applications that we can run. So the last thing we need to look at on the modding here is how to actually get some games onto our system. So I've put a DVD into my Xbox, and you can see here we have Just Dance 3. And DVDs, if you look at the outline of the icon in Aurora, you'll see it's red, and that means that is actually on the DVD. All the ones behind which are stored on my hard drive have a green outline. So to get this onto the system, so we're going to copy the files from our DVD, install them on our hard drive so that we no longer then need the DVD in our system. So to do this then, we're going to need to copy files, and that's in our system menu. So hit the back button on your controller, and we're going to go into File Manager. And we should there see we have a DVD listed in our drives. So let's open that up. And we can see that there are a number of files then in this DVD. And again, there's a whole set down here for all of the dance routines. So we need to copy all of these across onto our Xbox. So I'm just going to highlight each of these and select them. So I have my X button, as you can see in the menu down the bottom there, and I can simply go down and I can simply select everything. So once I've got everything selected, I can go across to my menu on the side, and I can go down to Copy. So again, I can hit A for copy those. So we've got 87 files here for copying. We now need to copy them onto our hard drive. So I'm going to go back one, and then I'm going to go to my hard drive. We're going to save all of our games in the Games folder, but I'm going to create a new folder for Just Dance 3. So I'm going to go up to Create. I'm just going to call this Just Dance 3. And once I've created that folder, I'm going to go inside the folder, then to my left-hand menu, and down the bottom we have the paste. So we're going to paste all of those copied files into here. So we say yes to that, and then we just wait for that to go through. Now, of course, it's going to copy across about 7 or 8 gigabytes of files, so this is going to take a bit of time. So we'll come back when that's finished. So once that's copied over, our game is now installed. So if we come back out of this, so going up out of this, back to our system menu, we need to do a restart to get it to rescan and find that new version of the game. So we should find that it's obviously got the Just Dance DVD, and there's our new one coming in. And it should then go off and find the cover art for that. And we now have Just Dance in there as well. Pardon me. So we have our red outlined one, which is the DVD. So if I just eject that, and you can see we now have our Just Dance 3 sitting in there. Now that game is now ready to play, but there's one more thing that we can do here. We can check to see if there are any title updates. So again, as games are released, they do then have updates released which you would have downloaded, but we can do that again through our Aurora system. So I highlight my game, I can then press Y to get to the game details. And then in the little sort of menu down the side, there is this icon here which is for the title update. So let's go and have a look and see if there are any title updates. So we have two sides to this tab here. One is the ones we have installed, and then on the marketplace, we there have a list of updates. So for this game, there's only one update, which is this version 1. So I can download that with the A button. So then if I use my left bumper again to get across to the installed section, I there have that one, and I can enable that by selecting it and pressing enable. And again, if there are more than one version, I could decide which version that I want to run. So I'll enable that one, and you can see it's now highlighted. And then we can go back, and that game is now set as its version 1 update. If I come out of here, the game is now ready to play. So if I select that, we should then jump into our Just Dance 3. And there we have our game coming up and running from our version on our hard drive. So that's installing games that you own on a DVD and copying all the files across and setting that up to run from our hard drive system. So that all covers then if you actually have a physical DVD of your game. But quite often we're going to be working from ISO files, so either you've created a backup or perhaps you've managed to get hold of one from somewhere on the internet. Now do remember that any of these files that you do find on the internet are probably still under copyright. So do make sure that you check all the legal implications for your region before downloading them. Copyright software is protected by law, so do make sure that you don't fall foul of those copyright laws for your particular country. But when you have an ISO file then, we do have the ability to extract the files from that and then copy those across onto our Xbox. So let's have a look at that process. So there are a number of ways of doing this, but the easiest is really to mimic what we were doing with the actual DVD. So the ISO file is an image of the DVD. So if we can open that up and get access to the Xbox files inside that, we can just simply copy those across exactly the same way into a games folder on our Xbox hard drive. Now to open up the file, open up the ISO file to actually get to the ones we want, we do need a little utility. So again, if you go to this web address, and again, all these links are in the description and on the project page, we can download this little utility and just save it onto our hard drive. And once that's downloaded, we can then come across, and all we need to do is to extract that archive. So I just extract that into its own folder. And then inside there, we will have, in the M22 folder, we have the actual little utility sitting there. So I have an ISO file sitting here for Forza Horizon. So if we come into our extractor application, I can go and find that file and just select that. And you can see that it's now identified the game and various sort of ID information about that game. So we're ready to extract it. So I have to select the output folder where I'm going to save this. And what the system's going to do is, again, these options here. So we're going to copy across the system update folder. We're going to get it to create a game folder called Forza Horizon. And that just means that it's going to put a folder on our hard drive with all of the files that we need inside that folder, which means that we can just simply copy that across onto our Xbox and we're ready to go. So everything's all set up here. So we just hit on the extract ISO and then just wait for that to complete. So this extraction process can take a few minutes to complete, and the command window here will look as if it is doing absolutely nothing. But please do just stick with it and wait, and it will eventually extract your files for you. So there we have our files extracted. So if I click on OK, I can have a look in my hard drive, and there we have our Forza Horizon folder. And if I go inside there, you'll see that we have again, our XEX files and so on, and everything for our game. So basically, we now need to get this folder into the games folder on our Xbox hard drive. So the most straightforward way of doing this is to create an FAT32 formatted USB stick, or you can use an SSD hard drive with a USB adapter. Again, you need to format it as FAT32. I can then simply copy the folder from my hard drive on my PC onto that USB stick, put it into my Xbox 360, and then in Aurora, again, we can use the file manager in exactly the same way as we did with the DVD drive to find our USB drive, copy that folder, and then go across onto our hard drive and paste it into our games folder. So using a USB stick is fine and everything works correctly, but there is a neater way of doing it where we can do actually everything from our PC. So I'm now on my Xbox, and if we go into our settings menu with the start button and come down to modules, you'll find that there is a module which is loaded by default, which is the FTP server. So if I go across to that and select that, we can see that the FTP server is enabled. And what this is, so FTP is File Transfer Protocol, and that lets one computer talk to the other and transfer files around. So if we come across into our credentials here, so our username is going to be Xbox FTP. The password, I think the default password is password, but we can change that anyway. Now this FTP server on the Xbox is only going to be accessible from your home network. So you don't really need to make it a very secure password. So I'm just simply going to set my password to 1, 2, 3, 4.
And that will be fine then. So as long as nobody on your network is going to hack into your Xbox, then you're fine. So we can just press done for that. And we're now ready to set that up. So our FTP server is active by default. We now have the login credentials. The port 21 is the default FTP port, so just leave that as it is. If we then come across and go back out to our dashboard, one thing we do need to find is where our Xbox is sitting on our network. So if we go into our system menu, you will see that there is an IP address listed up there. So we need that to be able to connect directly into our Xbox over the network. So make sure you take a note of that, because we're going to need that in the next step. So to be able to communicate with our Xbox over FTP, and first off, of course, we do need our Xbox connected to our network, so either over Ethernet or Wi-Fi. And then we need what's known as an FTP client. So the one I would recommend is FileZilla, and you can get that from this web address here. And what we need is the FileZilla client. So download that and install that onto your computer. So open up FileZilla. You'll be met with this interface here. And basically the way this works is that we have one side is our local computer and one side is our remote computer, which of course is going to be the Xbox. So the easiest way to get this set up is to use the Quick Connect box up the top here. So in our host, that's our IP address of our Xbox. So mine was that. Our FTP username then was Xbox FTP. And my password was 1234. And the port will automatically be 21, but you can just enter that in anyway. And if we then do a quick connect, we should find that it's just saying that it's going to collect it. So we're just going to say, yes, that's all fine. We don't need to have secure passwords for this. And you should find we are now looking at the storage devices on our Xbox. So if we go into our HDD1, which is our hard drive, we'll see that we have our games folder there. And if we go into that, you can see the games that we've already downloaded. So on the left-hand side, we just simply need to find the games folder that we want to copy across, which I've put into Games 2 here. So our Forza Horizon. And all we do is simply drag that from our local PC across into our remote PC and just drop it in there. And that will now start to copy all of those files across. And if you do look down in the bottom left corner, you can see how many files are left to be transferred. And above that, the actual transfers taking place. Now, the process is quite slow. And to be honest, I think the USB method is faster, especially if you use an SSD where you can load a load of games at once and then just leave it running, copying all those files across in one go. So either way, we'll end up with our files transferred across. Back onto our Xbox, we should have that folder then sitting in our games directory. So again, if we now come back out of there up to our main system, if we do a restart, we should then get it reworking out what games we have on our computer, and hopefully we should then have Forza coming up in our game selection. There we have it popping up, and hopefully we'll get a cover art for that as well. And there we have Forza Horizon. So if I go across and have a look at that, again, once we've just installed a game, we can go into its details, come down and see if there are any title updates for that. And again, there are a few here. So I'm going to download version 4 here. And then I can come across to my installed folder and just select that and enable that version. So if we come back out of here now, so we should now be able to play Forza Horizon. And there we go with our game up and running from our hard drive, and again installed then from our ISO file. So if you've managed to stick it all the way through to here, congratulations, you now have a fully modded Xbox 360 and you're able to install games from downloads and ISO files, so you should have access to pretty much the full Xbox 360 catalogue. Now there are of course a whole lot of other things that we can do with this and some topics we haven't yet covered.
For instance, some games do come as multi-disc games where there's 2 or 3 DVDs, and they need a slightly different setup. We haven't touched at all on the idea of using your Xbox 360 to emulate other consoles such as Nintendo 64 and so on. So I will be covering a lot of these in subsequent videos, so do make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell just to make sure that you're notified when I release these. And of course there are lots of other videos I'll be releasing on sort of general gaming, computers, project work and programming. So do please stick around. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful. Do have a go at modifying an Xbox 360 console. It is a great resource to have in your family. I look forward to seeing you again in other videos very soon, and bye for now. For more games programming, electronics projects and retro gaming, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel and visit my website.